Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Beacon in the Storm. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today, I have a very special guest with us. I have author and psychotherapist Tom Golden. Hi there, Tom. How's it going?
Hey, it's going well. It's good to see you.
Absolutely. And where do you hail from, Tom?
Near Frederick, Maryland, which is north of
Beautiful.
DC by about 40, 50 miles.
Wonderful. So, Tom, I found you because I came across one of your books. And it's The Way Men Heal, and
Hmm.
I absolutely wanted to have you on this show because I want to talk about men's issues on this show, and it turns out very, very few people want to talk about men's issues without getting angry at you. And you seem to be one. You seem to be one of the few people who actually wants to take kind of an academic, a clinical approach to this topic, and that's exactly how I want to do this because I was trained as an attorney, no longer an attorney, so don't bury me with the rest. But I like facts, I like data, I like science, and you seem to be someone who's looked into this, and I wanted to talk to you. So thank you so much for coming on with us today.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So maybe you can begin and let's start with, do men have issues? Because I get told every day that men don't have issues.
Who doesn't have issues, men or
There
women?
we go.
Everybody's got issues.
All right. Well, what kinds
That's
of issues do men have?
the same kind that women have. But I think if you're going to look at a global scale, men have the issue of being denigrated. And, for the last 50 years, we've been called pigs or uh, whatever you want to call it. Lately, it's toxic masculinity. I mean, the whole culture is framing men as being something wrong,
Okay.
something bad,
Now,
you know?
Tom, maybe you can give us a little bit about your background. How did you end up where you are today?
How did I end up where I am today? Well, I got out of graduate school and started working at a counseling center. And the counseling center was all female therapists except for me. So they fed me all the men, right?
Okay.
And I struggled because I've been taught in grad school how you deal with women. You sit, you face each other, and you talk about it, and you have good eye contact. All of those things are fine for women, but a lot of times for men, they don't work so hot. And I found that out very quickly because I had a big caseload of men.
Okay.
And so I knew that I had to find out what would work with men. And so I bumped into this cross-cultural research. It was a Center for Death and Dying where I was. So most of the men were grieving or traumatized in one way or another. And I bumped into this research on cross-cultural grief. And it was just so apparent from looking at the research that in all of these indigenous peoples, they had the women gather together and talk and emote
Hmm.
and support each other. They had the men do something. They took
Really?
some sort of action. Yeah. And so the more I studied it, the more I realized that that was going on. And then I started realizing, holy crap, the actions in our culture have been taken away by professionals. Now someone else digs the grave, someone else gives the eulogy sometimes, someone else
Mm.
takes care of the body. I mean, all of these things used to be done by men. And if you look at the indigenous cultures, always it's the men who do this. They take care of the body, they take care of the casket, they take care of the guests. I mean, they have things to do, and it left men with nothing to do in our culture, with very little to do.
That's
And so,
fascinating. Um,
so I started realizing, I started watching men, and instead of thinking about what they're feeling, I started looking at what they're doing.
okay.
And I realized at that point that men were telling their story of their grief through their actions and through honoring. Man, if you look at the word honoring, that's masculine up and down the pike. And it captures what happens with men after a death. Men will want to honor the death by doing something, something productive, you know? And it's through telling that story, it's through doing that action that men emote, that the emotions come out. If you want to talk to a man about his emotions, talk to him about his actions. That's what I realized at the time. I realized all I have to do is find out what this guy's doing in honor of, and we can talk about that till the cows come home. And he is very willing to talk about that because that's where he's at. That's what he's doing. Like this man who his son died in a car accident. He wrote this little book about his son. And it was a book not to be published, but he went around and did all kinds of interviews with his son's teachers and girlfriends and ex-girlfriends and ministers and whoever's. And each time he did the interview, what was he doing? He's doing the same thing someone else might do in a support group. He
Mm.
was getting them to tell the story, and he was sharing with them what his perceptions were. I mean, this was a beautiful way. And so he and I could talk about that book for forever. And the book was, he would just stop and cry because the book was filled with emotion. It was filled with it. I mean, that's where he was at. That's how he was dealing with his emotions, was through his action. And this whole thing of men dealing with action just confounds women. They don't get it. They don't understand it. They think, what's wrong with this guy? He's not dealing with his feelings because he's not talking about it. I found out that was completely wrong.
Okay.
And in the workshops I've done, I do workshops all over the world on how to deal with this stuff. And every time, man, the women coming up to me afterwards and they say, "Oh, Mr. Golden, thank you so much. I can't wait to go home and test this out on my husband." It's like they're seeing the world through new eyes. They're seeing the world through something that's very different. This one lady came up to me and she was crying, just crying and crying. I was, "What's up?" This was after the workshop.
Hmm.
She said, "I realized what happened with my brothers and my father." I said, "Well, what's the story?" She said, "Well, my mother died. And right after her death, my father and my brothers tore the house apart and redid it. They, they remodeled the entire house just like the mother wanted it. So they were doing all the remodeling in honor of the mother."
Tom, can I say real quick?
Man.
So we have a little bit of a similarity in the beginning of our careers because I started out as an elder law attorney. And so I
Huh.
was dealing with death and dying, and usually it was the wife coming in because her husband died, but rarely it was the husband coming in because his wife had passed. And what I had found is in that situation, the husband whose wife had passed, the widower, he was almost always dead within a year. And
Mm.
it's probably because he wasn't doing anything. I saw it over and over again. He grieved, but he grieved by sitting there and just lamenting, and he didn't do anything. I think the ones who did survive longer did something. So this is fascinating for me.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And he didn't know what to do. He's brought up in a culture where, men are denigrated,
Mm.
men are seen as toxic. And what he would naturally do, he's kind of hesitant to do what he naturally do because culture thinks there's something wrong with him.
Can you
He knows that everyone says he's supposed to be emoting, he's supposed to be crying. But we know now that testosterone limits emotional tears.
really?
Yeah. Well, think back when you were a little guy, when you
Mhm.
were 13 years old. Did you cry a lot then? No,
No,
you probably didn't. Did you cry when you're 6 or 7 or 8? Yes, you probably did.
probably every scrape knee, I'm
Right when
sure.
test, right when the testosterone hits, the boy's tears dry up. When I was in graduate school, I was thinking I was just trying to be tough. I was trying to, show how strong I was, blah, 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 blah. But then I found out, uh-oh, the testosterone actually limits the tears. It slows the tears down. So for men to cry, it takes a lot.
Okay,
It's not that they can't. It's just, it takes more effort, actually.
sure. Now you said when you were still getting your education that they were training you essentially to deal with women. Can you speak to
Yeah.
that? Like, is
Oh,
there
yeah.
one track? This is how you're supposed to deal with a client, and then it just turns out, oh, it doesn't work for guys.
Well, yeah, the one track was the female way, which they didn't know was the female way. I mean, they had
Okay.
no way to know that. I mean, it wasn't like they were misogynist or misandrist. They were just doing what they thought was the right thing. Because at the time, healing was two things. It was crying about it and talking about it. I mean, that's the way you heal. That's a very feminine way to heal. Now, it's important to note that there are going to be some women who are going to heal more like the men. There are going to be some men who heal more like the women. It's about 20% on either end, you know? So it's not like all men do it one way and all women do it another way. It's not like that at all. In fact, if you look at the indigenous people, the women usually did it both ways. Women would also use action, but the primary was through emoting and talking. And the same thing happens in our culture. You find that women will tend to use both action and emoting, whereas men will usually rely more on just the action.
Now, in your book, you mentioned that 20% happens in utero.
Well, yeah, there's this thing that happens in utero called the testosterone flood, which I mean, most people have no idea this goes on, but it does. And I think it's like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I forget exactly when it is. But the testosterone flood changes all kinds of things, including the brain,
Okay.
and it changes. What do they have it down to? Four things now that they know it changes, and there's a bunch of things they think it changes. But things like our gender identity is is affected by this testosterone flood. The way we play is affected by this testosterone flood. Our,
Interesting.
oh gosh, what are the elements? I forget what they are. But yeah, and it's this testosterone flood then that sets us up. And it also, the other thing it does is the testosterone flood limits the tears from testosterone. It slows things down. So, and you think about it. I mean, evolutionarily, do we want men who usually protected the perimeter to go into tears? No, you want them to pull the trigger.
Right. When they see a
You
bug,
know,
squish it rather than scream, right?
you're taking care of your people, and so you do not want him emoting. When a cop goes to an accident scene, you don't want him going, "Oh my God, I can't deal with this." You want him to just buckle up, take care of business, and then emote afterwards, which testosterone helps men to do.
Okay,
You
but
know,
as you just said, that emoting that they do afterwards is through some sort of action.
sometimes,
Okay.
sometimes it's not. I mean, like I was saying before, that this is not a binary thing where all men do it one way and all women do it another way. I mean, men, when they, the bottom line is, people won't openly emote until they feel safe. Men usually will feel safe in an action that's shoulder to shoulder. Women will usually feel safe in an interaction, where the person cares for them.
Okay.
So, if a man is on his own in a room with the door locked, he feels safe. He'll probably emote. If he's with someone who loves him, who cares for him, and who will listen, which is rare for men, if he's got someone like that, he'll open up like crazy. What I learned was that as soon as these men realized that I loved them and I cared about them and I wanted the best for them, they were much more open about their emotions.
Okay, but
But
that's
men, we,
generally not everybody.
what do you mean?
Well, you said generally not all men do this. That
Well,
some men are
I
more
think
willing to be, in the group setting, willing to cry
if they feel
if
safe,
they feel safe. Okay.
if they feel safe. Now, remember, the research these days on, oh gosh, what's it called? Um, Moral typecasting
Okay.
shows that women are automatically seen as someone who deserves compassion, someone who deserves our concern and our care. Men are the opposite. Men are not seen as someone who deserves compassion, our care. And so this is what they call the empathy gap,
Hmm.
where there's empathy for women, but very little for men. So this is why men are much more reluctant to emote in public, because most people will see them as something terrible if they emote, you know?
Do you have any theories as
Uh,
why that exists? Is this just kind of from time immemorial? These are the social roles we've played, or is it psychological? Like, why is this empathy gap exist?
I think that a part of it's evolutionary, that men have been the protectors and the providers, and that women have needed caretaking, they've needed care. And so thousands, 100,000 years like that, I mean, that's going to have an impact on our general psyche. We inherit this stuff. It's sort of in us. And the whole thing with implicit bias. Do you know about implicit bias?
Hmm.
They've been studying this stuff for like since the 90s. And the implicit bias is our unconscious biases against something. And they've studied unconscious bias based on race, unconscious bias based on social class, unconscious bias based on women mostly, sometimes men, but they've never put all of them together and compared the different biases to see which one is the biggest until the last 6 months. And I forget the guy's name that did the research, but he came up with this blockbuster study which showed that the bias against men is by far the largest bias out there,
Okay.
way above race, way above social class. And there's a positive bias for women. So this is the wall that men are up against. This is the wall, and it is a big wall because
So,
men have to prove themselves.
okay. So, you started off your career working mostly with men.
Yep.
At what point did you decide that, this is a big enough issue that I need to speak about this? Like, because you've written books on this issue, or you're a speaker on this
I
issue. Like, at
I
some point,
kept
you had to have gone, someone needs to say
man.
something.
In the 90s, I kept going to the bookstore looking for a book on men and grief. And I thought, somebody's got to write it. Come on, somebody's got to write it. And then someone wrote it. It was a woman. And
Okay.
I read the book and I went, oh, no. She doesn't get it all. So then that motivated me. I said, okay, damn it, I'm going to write the damn thing. And so I did. That was the Swallowed by a Snake book, which was the first one that came out in the 90s that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was kind enough to give me a plug for, bless her heart. And then I guess 10 years later, I wrote The Way Men Heal, which is the one that you had to look at, which is much shorter. It's like 50 pages. It's brief because I know men in crisis don't want to read a missioner. They don't want a long ass book. They want something short that they can get to that tells them, gets to the verb. And so 50 pages is about what I could squeeze it down to. And that book has been very popular. Men like that book.
Okay, so your works are all from a place of essentially your profession. You're working to help people rather than address issues.
Right. Yeah. My actual work is as a therapist with people. Yes.
Wonderful. What are some surprising facts that you've learned through the years, if any, about the way men, emote, the way they operate differently than women do?
One of the most surprising things I found was, I guess, 10 years ago, was the testosterone research done by a guy named Eisenegger. And what he showed was that testosterone is not about violence. It's not about aggression. Testosterone is about striving for status.
Status.
And that men...
Status. I'm just repeating you.
Status, yeah. Men striving for status. That's what we are built to do. It's what our juice inside tells us to do. And we push to strive for status, get as high as we can in the hierarchy. Because men live in a hierarchy. That hierarchy is based on our status and what we do to get higher up in the hierarchy.
Now, Tom, I've had plenty of feminists tell me that right there is actually toxic masculinity, that we're teaching little boys
Of course
to do
it
that.
is.
Not that this is ingrained in their biology.
Oh boy, it's ingrained in biology. All you have to do is read the Eisenegger stuff and you'll see that men and women do not have this same push. I did a video, I guess a couple of years ago now, on the 4 things that make boys and men's lives, or boys and girls' lives different. And it talks about testosterone, talks about moral typecasting, precarious manhood, and what's the other one? I forget what the other one is. And these are the things we're talking about right now is men and women are very different, but the media will not tell you that. There's a huge amount of research out there about men and boys that never hits the streets. You do not hear about it. And so people are obviously influenced by what they read in the newspaper and see in movies. And none of that is looking at and honoring the research that's been done. It's beautiful research, just amazing. But it's ignored by the media. So it leaves people ignorant. It leaves people very ignorant of what men are like, and the reasons they are.
Yeah. So you've been in the field for a couple decades at least.
70s, the 80s, 90s, 10s.
30, 40 years.
That's 40 some years.
And you've been able to observe what's been happening. Why is the men's research being ignored? Why are men's issues being ignored? Why is it just the empathy gap, is that it? Or is there something else?
Oh, there's all kinds of things going on. There's this thing called gynocentrism, which is invisible but deep in our culture. And it's there for a good reason. The gynocentrism says that men are there to take care of the needs of women. And bottom line is men should sacrifice for women. And so anything that moves in that direction gets harmony in our culture. Anything that moves in the direction of men doing for women is harmonious. But if men ask for something for themselves, that's breaking the mold. That's going backwards. You don't do that, and you get a lot of shit for it. You catch a lot of crap.
I have a great example of that, actually. When I was planning my wedding with my wife, I didn't want some vegetable, and I got a lot of trouble for that, and just not wanting the vegetable.
How dare you not want a vegetable?
That's her wedding,
exactly.
a happy wife, happy life sounds like it's coming from that as well.
Yes, it's the men's sense of obligation to take care of, and it's invisible. People don't know about it. There's a great site, gynocentrism.com, run by Peter Wright, which, if you want more information on gynocentrism, go there. It's a fascinating study. And it's one of those things, it's like implicit bias. It's underneath the covers. You don't see it. You don't see it, but it's there and it's impacting everything.
Okay, is this something that is scientifically backed, or is this as it might? Is it just misogyny? Is this chauvinism? Is this
Well, gynocentrism is kind of the layman's word, actually, in some ways. If you look at the moral typecasting, the testosterone research, the implicit bias research, the
okay?
precarious manhood research, all of those things point you in the direction of this whole gynocentric element that just rains down invisibly on us. The precarious manhood thing is so critical and so important. That's another piece of the research that we haven't talked about. And that says, that I guess this was 15 years ago, a guy named Vandello did this research, and I think they're still doing it. They've gone around the world, they've studied all different cultures, and they've studied what does it take to be a man?
Hmm.
Fascinating question, right?
Yeah.
Have you heard about anything with that in the research or in the media? No. What they found was this. In order to be a man, men must prove they are men. You can
Mm.
contrast that with women when they get their period, they're 12, whatever, they're considered women after that. Men have to prove it,
Oh, that's
and they have to prove it publicly. And they also know that it could go away if they don't prove it.
That's
So,
fascinating because I came across some research that said when a man's masculinity is tested, he becomes more aggressive. And so I guess
yes,
that
yes.
plays into that because if our job is to prove that we're men and you're being said, oh, you're not a man, well, I'd be upset about it too.
And that's another thing with the testosterone is part of what happens with testosterone is that it does what they call threat vigilance. So remember, testosterone says strive for status, get as much status as you possibly can. And why is that? It's because it's going to make it easier for the women to choose a good mate because they're going to choose the top status guy, the guy with the most money, the guy with the most power, the guy with the most real estate. I mean, whatever, the guy's the tallest. All of these things combined are factors. But so men are striving for status all the time without even thinking about it. But there's this other thing inside the man that's pushed by testosterone. It's called threat vigilance. It says if someone challenges your status, fight back.
Okay.
And so this is where you get bar fights, you know, because one guy, they're probably both halfway to the, you know,
Sure.
when with their
Three
being
sheets to the
drunk.
wind, right?
But yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. But at the same time, one guy insults another guy. Threat vigilance kicks in. The guy says, "Oh yeah, you can't talk to me like that." "Oh yeah, who are you?" And then it's off. Then you're finished. You know.
Okay. So
So this is threat vigilance. But women don't understand this one bit. They keep saying, I see it all the time in public. I see women going, "Why does he have to prove himself all the time? Why does he have to fight back when someone challenges him about such and such?" Well, this is why. This is why it's inside. It's in his biology. It says to him, "Don't let that go. If you let that go, you're in trouble."
so are you saying that the haters I get on my social media that's saying that men are defective are right then?
What's defective about fighting back?
Well, in a nice, orderly society, should we not be using our words? Why would we be using our
I mean, you
fists?
could fight back with words. Why not?
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
But then we see that 90 some percent of crime is committed by men, 96% of murders are committed by men.
And what percent of men commit those murders and crimes?
Much smaller percent. It's a minority.
Less than 1%.
Hmm.
And how many women commit child abuse? Most of them. I mean, most of the child abuse is committed by women. And what percent of women are doing that? Less than 1%. But do we look at women and go, oh, they're toxic. They commit child abuse. No, because we understand 99 point some percent of women are fine. They're never going to do that. But we don't give men the same break. We judge them harshly. We judge the whole enchilada just for one guy who pulls something dumb,
And
you know?
I do have an issue with that. The men need fixing. Well, point fingers, guys. Which one? Like, fix that man.
Really?
Like, I'm good.
Oh, God. But you see, the whole thing with men need fixing plays right into the move of gynocentrism. Of course they do. They need to take better care of women. The men need to change. They need to become better men. Better men means he's going to take better care of the women.
So it's funny. I on a Father's Day, just
Oh
this
boy.
last month, I saw an article on CNN talking about men's health. and how,
Yeah.
men don't pay enough attention about their health and they need better mental health and so at the end of the article, they didn't say that men should take these steps. They're like, the women in men's lives need to take these steps to get men to take better care of their health. I was really confused because I read this article like, what can I do? Like, nope, you can't do anything. Get your wife to take care of you.
We've got 7 national commissions for women's health, maybe up to 8 or 9 by now. We've got 0 for men. 0.
And we live, on average, 5 years less than women do?
Right. And we die more often from almost every major disease than women. But all of the commissions for health are for women. Why? Take care of the women first. I mean, that's the call. Ladies first.
Women and children first, right? And
there you go. That's exactly right.
And I'm sitting there going, why is my life less value? If we're talking utilitarianism, right? Like the value that an individual is bringing, like the man's the one not working. Isn't he doing more for the community? Shouldn't we be saving him?
Right.
But
right.
That's not how it is.
Doesn't work like that. Gynocentrism.
All right, Tom, I truly appreciate taking time to come on with us today. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share as we wrap this up?
No, if people want more information, they can go to menaregood.locals.com or menaregood.substack.com, and there's a whole bunch of stuff there.
Beautiful. And my final question was, how can people get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out?
I just told them.
But
the other thing is, I wrote a book. The 3rd book that I wrote is for women, for how do you get close to your son? And it goes into all the things we've talked about today, except for the implicit bias research actually happened after that. But it's a great book for moms learning about boys, because women don't have a chance to understand what's happened with boys. I mean, they grew up women. The guys know what it's like to be a boy because that's the way they grew up. So I realized there's so many single moms out there, and there's very little information for them about boys and how they're different. So that's why I wrote that one.
Yeah.
I love that little book.
My own mom could have used that. She did not know how to handle me. Man, we had some epic fights growing up.
All right.
But thank you so much, Tom Golden. I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's good to be here.
And for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, keep looking for the light in the tempest. God will show you the way.